Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Grow Sessions brought to you by TSR Grow. My name is Mark. I'm your host today, and I want to welcome Darwin Millard, aka the Spock of Cannabis. Good to have you, Darwin. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate this opportunity to chat with everybody.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. So, the Spock of cannabis, right? Let's jump right in because, when I first heard that, um, Star Trek fan, and my first thought is it, that you're encouraging everyone to live long and prosper, or are you using the Vulcan death grip to extract what you need out of the people? Where'd you get that nickname?
Great question. So actually, I kind of taken it right into live long and process, right?
Okay.
Yeah, within our industry, right?
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, So, um, I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and I specialize in mechanical and solvent-based extraction methodologies for isolating terpenolic secondary metabolites from botanicals, which is a fancy way of saying I know how to make oil well. So, I took that expertise and my love and passion of hash and had an opportunity to turn that into a career, which I'm super happy and fortunate about. And throughout, I guess, my career as a consultant, as well as like a fractional CSO, and a production director and all of that fun stuff. I've always kind of had an eye for or a tendency to be cold and logical in my delivery, but also we're trying to tell clients, what they need to hear and not what they want to hear. And when I started becoming a volunteer member at ASTM International, helped create standards for the global market, some of my colleagues were like, yeah, you're like the Spock of cannabis, and it stuck.
That's great. That's great. And Spock was cold and logical, but anybody that was into the movies or the shows or whatever, knows that in the right circumstances, he really had a big heart, right? He
Yeah,
really
yes.
he really was always coming from a good place and wanted everybody to do well and be safe. And so I think that's awesome. Your background, right, is in extraction, it sounds like, and
hmm
love of hash. So how did you get into that?
Um, that's a good question. How I fell in love with the cannabis plant is probably like many others' stories, being introduced to it early on. I've actually been consuming since I was 14, so a long time. So, friends, I guess you could call that peer pressure and all that fun stuff. But that evolved over time into something just a lot more, I guess, intimate than that. And I've always kind of found the trichomes fascinating, and how they grow uh, off of the surface of the cannabis plant. And that's where really all the magic happens, is in this totally different thing that almost has its own life cycle, or it really does, on this other organism. And they almost live like, a synergistic life type of uh, um, life cycle. Anyways,
Yeah, yeah.
and that has just kind of like driven to me to be like, what is this? And that's kind of where my passion came from.
Yeah, it's like an alien world when you're able to zoom in.
Oh yeah.
My first experience, it was like probably 97. I was in college. We were getting really good Canadian bud that was way better than anything we'd seen on the East Coast up until that point, and I'm like 18 years old. And a girl in our dorm had an opaque, I think it's called an opaque microscope, where you could stick anything under it. And so we started sticking f flour under it and looking, and my mind was blown at what is going on, under the surface of flour, right? That was my first experience with even seeing the resinous and the glands and this, hairs up close and things. And it was just absolutely, yeah, mind blowing,
Yeah.
right? When you first realize that there's so much more going on in this plant than meets the eye.
I mean, I'm certainly old enough to have started from swag and
Yeah.
compressed bricks and not having any idea what trichomes are, and then being introduced to like BC,
Yeah.
and Kind Bud for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean, it was definitely, and then, my first experience with any type of extraction, I went over to a friend's house and right about the same era, like 98, something like that. And they were dumping flour into a 5 gallon bucket full of ice water, and they had a blender, like a paint blender hooked up to a
Yeah.
drill. And I thought they'd lost their minds. I was like, you guys you're dumping perfectly good flour. What are you doing? Like, I couldn't even fathom what they were doing. And I don't know if I stuck around long enough that day to figure it out. But, since then, obviously, I've been introduced to all these different forms of extraction. Is there a method of extraction that you particularly gravitate towards?
Oh, I mean, solventless by far is what I would say is my method would be my method of choice. That's the my product of choice. I love solventless concentrates. Classical water hash or bubble hash is certainly still something I try to find. But it's rare these days, right? When it's much easier to produce a quality product from something that you express from the resin glands, right, and turn it into rosin. You can do a lot of things with that in a way that the raw trichome heads themselves, right, are less forgiving.
Yeah. And I think the rosin, right? So I've always called it squish. Uh like what why like I see, people, I think that's like the greatest form factor, right? But the question that I've always had is how come nobody's come up with an easier way to do it? It seems very difficult, labor intensive, I would say. Like I always look at everything from like a facilities construction
hmm
CapEx standpoint that then turns into your OpEx. And, these machines just seem very small to me. Is there no way to make that more of a larger process where you could do larger batches, or is there something to having to do it in those smaller batches? Or is it just the equipment that we have available?
Yeah, I mean, well, it kind of depends on what you. So there are certainly commercial scale uh, mechanical separation systems that are available, and they do a great job. And I mean by like commercial scale, I mean like they work through tons of
Mm-hmm.
material, and those were built for the CBD industry when everyone thought that that was going to be a huge, big deal, right? And really the agricultural sector in regards to processing that. Whistler Tech is a great example, right? They started huge and they've actually really compressed back down now to the niche, small batch operator, right? The craft grower who's really trying to just release super high-end quality material and product, but have a controlled, mechanized process that also, helps reduce labor costs and all of those things and can be much more reproducible and potentially GMP certified down the road.
Okay. All right. So you have this great experience, as an engineer, right? And you went to Boulder, I think, right?
I
You
did. Yep.
college in Boulder, right up here, right where I am. And you've got this love of the plant and this love for, hash and extraction technologies and these things. You started cannabis safety and quality.
So
Is
actually,
that now you
um,
started it, or you're employed by them, or what?
I'm a humble employee.
Oh, okay.
It
Okay.
was actually started by Tyler Williams. It's his brainchild or baby, along with his mom, who come from classical food safety,
Hmm.
beverage, cosmetic safety certification, independent auditing and assessment of producers, and also a passion for cannabis and being licensed operators in a couple of states, growing and being dispensary operators as well. Saw there
Yeah.
was a gap
Mhm.
in what the safety and quality management systems available to the licensed marketplace and created CSQ.
Okay. And what is your role there? What are you doing with CSQ?
So I am the technical director. So it's my job now to help develop, manage, and maintain all of our standards, which we have five that span the entire supply chain, as well as an addendum that help you conform with the requirements for dietary supplements. And I manage those, make sure they're up to date, make sure they actually fit where our industry is at. I continuously improve them, and such as soon, we're hoping to have a solventless certification program, right? Back to my love of solventless, so that people who are claiming to have solventless products, right, they can get a higher price for that product on the marketplace right now. And there is an opportunity to protect the market from fraud or those who might want to uh, manipulate the industry or buyers by saying that they're selling solventless when they don't actually have solventless. And this would be a way for buyers who are really true connoisseurs looking for solventless to be able to know who's really is solventless on the market,
Mm.
but also say a solventless edibles producer, right? There's a lot of opportunity there in that supply chain where, well, maybe they didn't get actual rosin that time from a supplier. But because, there is certainly an opportunity where live resin or batters, right, from the hydrocarbon side can look like rosin. And it's not like you're going to fool everybody, but potentially you might, right? So this is a way that anyone who's making solventless edibles, right, or rosin edibles or otherwise, are really trying to get that higher that price value proposition for it, have a way of proving they have solventless. And the lab shopping is an issue with with the marketplaces currently. So we've also got an assessment program for laboratories coming out that I'm really excited about. So
Okay.
really, that's how we're trying to help solve some of these gaps in the marketplace and elevate it and give operators a way to show the safe how safe and of quality their product is.
Okay. So an operator really would work with cannabis safety and quality and yourself on not only differentiating their product in the marketplace, but also improving, sounds like improving operations, improving using your SOPs, your systems, your training to get better at what they're doing or get safer with what they're doing or increase quality. Is that accurate? That's kind of two sides of that coin.
Well, yes, absolutely. Things like good manufacturing practices or good agricultural and collection practices on the growing side can absolutely help licensed growers and other operators with mitigating business risks, helping improve their operating costs. But I think a good way to think about it is like it's like having an insurance plan, but better than that because uh, with instead of banking on a your final product testing, right, to pass this crop that you've got to get out into the marketplace, and then if it doesn't pass, what are you going to do, right? Well, you've got to do something. It's usually not okay to take a loss, right? So you either remediate it, which is rework, right? Which is recost, which lowers the value of it when you actually then do get it out the door, which isn't a good solution, right? Or you find another lab, right, who passes your product, which is just fraud. And that's not a good thing. So we shouldn't be doing that either. So a GACP certification and or a GMP certification really does allow you to know or have very good confidence, right, that that product's going to pass your final product testing. And because you've put in preventative measures, right? You've mitigated those risks ahead of time.
Got it. So you mentioned good agricultural practices, good manufacturing, collection, so GMP, GAP, GACP, these things. What do they all mean?
Yeah.
For people that don't know, like what are we even talking about? Like what does it mean to the facility, to the operator, to the day to day? How does it change things? How is it different than what we do today?
Oh, all good questions. And one point is that it's not really different from what every other industry already does. Whether it's agriculture whether it's your local grower or sorry, a smaller mom and pop operation, right? Adhering to things like good manufacturing practices and good agricultural collection practices are really the bare minimum product safety and quality standards that these other traditional industries have put in place to help mitigate business risks, but also protect consumer health and safety. The difference, right? So good GMPs is good manufacturing practices. So what like think of that as like when you're processing your flour and packaging it right into containers and getting it out the door to your consumers. And then you have good agricultural and collection practices, which is everything before that. The seed management, or protecting your propagation materials, going through mother, veg, and cloning, or then propagating your flower, right? Harvesting all of that, dry and cure, and really understanding where the line is between when your growing practices stop and where you're now actually starting to process things. So that's kind of like where you have your good agricultural practices
Mhm.
when you're growing and your GMPs when you're now processing those things. And, a way to think of them, right, is if you have a happy facility, you have happy people, you're going to have happy plants. Uh, but what does it mean for your operations, right? What are you going to put in place if you're going to intend to meet GACPs, right? Well, you've got clearly articulated personnel training qualifications for each role. You've established a hazard analysis and critical control points program for mitigating physical, chemical, and biological hazards. You've implemented things like corrective actions and preventive actions plans that include things like root cause analysis that allow you to help investigate nonconformances or problems that occur while they're happening in the facility. It requires you to set up things like vendor qualifications and defining what your raw material and your final product specifications are. So you know you've actually made the thing
Mm.
you said you're going to sell out to the market, right? And includes things like conducting internal audits, mock recalls, as well as routine personnel, process, and product evaluations. So you're knowing, right? You've been able to trend that you're keeping things in line.
Okay. So it sounds like from that aspect, it's a lot of like documentation.
Yeah.
There's paperwork, there's, like you said, mock recalls and going through the process of verifying that the systems you've put in place are actually working in
Hmm.
real time. So, from my aspect, whenever I'm asked to do something it's more typically to GMP for the manufacturing spaces, it's things, there's certain aspects that we have to hit from a design build standpoint, right? Like the one thing that always comes up is that they want cove base on the floors, which is something a lot of people don't do because it's an extra cost and they don't see it as a benefit. I personally like it, but in grow rooms and processing rooms as well. But it's things like that where they specifically were required to have that. We're required to have hand sinks within a certain space, within a certain distance of work areas. We're required to usually have the ceilings, if they're drops, they have to be gasketed drops. There's certain qualifications to like the lighting and things like that that we have to meet, the wall coverings, different things like that. But if is it also like, you know, things as simple as hair nets, glove usage? Like, is it that basic? And I think back to before I got into commercial scale controlled environment ag, I was a restaurant guy.
Hmm.
And I was a restaurant guy for years and years and years. And there were, rules that we had to follow from the health department. Like, cooks had to wear hats or cover their hair.
Basic
You
hygiene.
had to wear gloves. You had to wash your hands in certain intervals. You had to change your gloves. You had to handle different foods in different areas of the kitchen to avoid cross-contamination. Is it things like that that we're really putting into practice and then documenting and verifying?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. And it can, in some cases, be as simple as better, more rigorous personal hygiene and training, right, for people to know, as you said, when they should be washing their hands, how often should they be changing their gloves, how do you wear your hairnet correctly, what type of garment should be worn in what facilities, do you need eye protection in this area versus that area, right? All of these things are what can not only help make sure you're producing quality product, right, but you're keeping your employees safe, happy, and healthy.
Okay. And is it the same sort of standards or the same sort of physical and um, cultural barriers that we're putting in place in the manufacturing side as well as in the ag production side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And but it should, of course, be recognized there are nuances between when you're growing and you're in a uh, purely production type of scenario. Different risks that need to be accounted for. Maybe in your growing environment, there might be more, you need to be more concerned with things like foreign matter from things like your grow media, because that might be loose, right? And could potentially get, if especially if you're growing outside, right? There's going to be potentially a lot of dirt and debris that might be a foreign contaminant that's going to be on your material you need to have be more concerned about than say if you're making gummies and what you buy, right, is maybe an extract from a processor already, right? There's going to be much different concerns for this producer of the gummies when they're evaluating that extract that they receive, as well as the different ingredients they're using to make their gummies. And then when they produce those gummies on their line, then when the grower is evaluating, say, their nutrient suppliers, developing their fertigation protocols or irrigation or hand watering requirements in order to result in a consistent product at the end of the day.
Okay. So, I've been in plenty of facilities where you would walk in and think they would, based on, what we've just described, what you've described and sort of the points we've made here, you would think, oh, they must be following GACP, GMP. They're, everybody's in Tyvek suits. It looks like spacemen walking around. Everybody's got a
Mhm.
beard net on that has a beard, and you know, gloves are being used, and they've got the nice floors, like in the sinks and all the things, all the bells and whistles of that. And yet they still can't pass testing. So is it because the process that you talked about of the documentation and checking to verify and doing all that portion of it isn't in place? Or is it because in some states the parameters of testing are just so difficult that you could be growing in a sealed room on the moon and you still wouldn't pass?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there in the end of your last statement in a sealed room. Sealed rooms typically have really bad airflow, and when you've got plants that like to breathe, right, you're going to have a lot of potential opportunity for mold, mildew, and other contamination, right, to grow on your crop, especially if it's inside or in a semi-enclosed space. So in that case, right, that's where something like corrective actions and preventive actions and going through a root cause analysis would have you start to dig in. Those are core elements of GMPs, right? Or good agricultural collections practices as well. Lets you dive into that and maybe you find out it's my room. My room doesn't have good airflow. Oh, my facility is not designed appropriately at all from the get-go. That ends up being where I would tend to go with where a lot of these things start to fall. If you have uh, everything that looks great and shiny on the outside, right? In those situations where the grow still seems to fail, it typically comes down to the space itself may have been inadequately designed for the actual uh, water vapor and air vapor exchange that occurs in that space. Another thing I do see a lot of times is it's too expensive to have isolated and individual HVAC systems per grow. And so uh, you're utilizing the same air systems, right, for maybe potential different veg rooms or this, on the same line, right, or different blooms. And
Hmm.
then maybe you had a
Yeah,
problem in room A that now is also in room B because they share the same air. And that really does start to, you only identify these things either through a root cause analysis, identification, right, or investigation through your facility. Um, or you've really kind of thought about these things ahead of time in the design of those facilities, but you had to make some decisions, right, on where your actual costs would be. And so now you've got to not only have your good agricultural and collection practices in place, but potentially a facility upgrade.
got it. All right. So is that where you see things kind of fall apart a lot of time or not really work? Is it kind of goes back to design and functionality of the living, breathing machine that we build to grow in?
Yeah, the facility and facility infrastructure is critical, right? As I mentioned before, the happy facility is going to mean happy people, is going to mean happy plants, right? And that really, it is sometimes as simple as that. And what I fear is that when we get to things like Schedule 3 or whatever in the future, right, a lot of licensed operators are going to be given a bill that they don't want, right? That it's they're going to see that their facilities can't get certified because maybe they're still growing in a wooden room or with a room that has a bunch of wooden infrastructure still. Or there are various other things I've seen a number of times. You mentioned the drop ceilings, they could be improperly put in place, right?
Mhm.
You already mentioned the coping on the floor, which is a typical way people try to remove seams, which is a part of facility design within GMPs or good agricultural collection practices as well, is that you want to make things easy to clean. And cracks, crevices, nooks, crannies, seams are hard to clean. So that's why people, go to the above and beyond in a lot of cases to create facilities that are washed down when maybe wipe down would be sufficient. But it really comes to what your operations are. And in a lot of cases, as I said, right, the build itself is kind of the Achilles heel of these operations.
Okay. So, you mentioned Scud 3, and I want to get to that, but I wanted to ask this first, which
Mhm,
is, I'd done quite a bit of work in the sort of heyday boom cycle of Canadian legalization and the mass build outs, the massive build outs that were going on up there, huge facilities, most of which, had the goal and several of which had the then ability to sell into the European market,
mhm,
to export. And so they were all required to be EU GMP, and meet those standards. And they were even inspected regularly, from what I recall, by inspectors, whether they were coming over from Europe or whether they contracted with them in Canada, I don't know. But they were being inspected to make sure they were up to snuff, and that was part of their ability to export to Germany or wherever they were exporting to.
mhm.
When those types of inspections happen, are they looking at your documentation, your protocols, all the things you talked about, and the physical nature of the facility and the cultural behaviors and physical barriers and things we talked about? Are they looking at all of that, or are they looking at all of that and they're looking at test results?
Um, yes, and do all of those things. So, um, if people are looking to access different global markets, right, the requirements are certainly much more significant than what we have here in the United States. We're in a very interesting situation, right, where each state has their different frameworks. We're not federally legal yet if we're talking about the marijuana side of the cannabis coin, but it's different for our hemp colleagues who are federally legal, who may be producing CBD or other non-intoxicating cannabinoid dominant varieties, which can be regulatorily classified as hemp and want to now take advantage of the global marketplace. Uh, if they want to do that, right, that means they, as you said, in some cases, right, they need to have either partnered with a already certified EU GMP producer who is looking to acquire input materials which meet the EU GACP requirements for cannabinoid herbal materials. In some cases, right, those producers in Canada, for instance, as in your example, decided to go above and beyond and get themselves EU GMP certified, which did mean that for every country they wanted to export to, the notifying body in that country came to them to certify them, did a physical audit of everything. As you said, the facility, the qualifications of even their equipment, tracking down all the contact surfaces, right? Is it actually stainless steel? These various things, right? All of your personnel training protocols, making sure everyone's qualified, making sure you're actually having someone as the role designated as a quality your quality person, right? Your QP, who puts their name on every batch that's released from that facility, making them personally liable, right, for anything that could possibly happen from the result of that product. Those are That's a big deal, right? And complying with those standards is a pretty it's a big step, but it's manageable to do. As we already mentioned a bunch of these things, right? You got to have good training qualifications articulated for all your personnel and your different roles, right? HACCP, your hazard analysis, critical control points, all of those things. Your CAPA, right? Your corrective actions, preventative actions. We discussed all of that. Vendor qualification programs, your internal audits, right? But the other things on top of that now means also having a master manufacturing record, also called, which encompasses not only your product specifications, but also your packaging material specification and your labeling specifications, as well as all of your batch records for that product. Like how that product is made. But then you also need to have those batch records that are capturing at the moment each step occurs, who did it, and so basically they're documenting, right? They're putting the technician who's literally adding ingredient A to ingredient B at step 3 is putting their initials down that they did that, that they verified that they met the weight requirement in the batch record, right, for ingredient A, and they put their name down, right, initials. And then on top of that, right, I kind of alluded to not just having in the manufacturing record your product specifications, right? But the full specifications for everything that's associated with that product, including each accessory that goes along with that product if it goes in the packaging container. And it also has, further development and management of your quality control, operating, manufacturing, and laboratory testing protocols.
Wow. So I'm curious, I would think that like pharmaceutical industry probably operates this way. Who
Yes.
else, who else has to manufacture under these sorts of regulations and guidelines? And one of the things I'm thinking about is one like where else does it apply? Certainly, but like, who else in the world that's operating today kind of knows this stuff inside and out and might be good for our industry to look to for resources?
Sure. Well, as we kind of started, right? Basically, every industry needs to comply with certain types of quality standards. And there are certifications that operators can get that show that they demonstrate conformance with these various types of standards. But good agricultural collection practices, GMPs, right? Those aren't unique things to cannabis in any way. Those are the bare minimum standards, as I mentioned before, that you see in the agricultural industry, that you see in food and beverage, that you see in cosmetics, and that you see in the dietary supplement industry. So it's and what I think is a good analogous point here, right, is that like if you want to sell your product in Costco, you've got to meet Kirkland brands requirements, right? If you want to be, or if you more specifically, I apologize, if you want to be under the Kirkland brand, right? You got to go through the Kirkland Quality Assessment Program, right? There's
Mhm.
qualifications you need to meet for that. If you want to sell into Target or sell into uh, any of the normal big box retailers, Walmart, any grocery store, King Supers here in the United States, right? Or sorry, in Colorado, but
Yeah.
Kroger nationally,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Right.
You want
Yeah.
to sell into those, you have to be GMP certified. And
Okay.
that's done because they want to mitigate their risk as the retailer, right? That any product they're carrying is actually good, right? And but they don't want to have to go through all that due diligence, testing all the product and everything on when that's why they rely on vendor qualifications and third-party certifications of their suppliers. And that's how a mature industry really works, right? And we can only expect that to be what we'll get to. And really, we should have been saying we needed that from the start to build in these harm reduction things that, all the prohibitionists, right, continue to push back and say, think of the children. And it's like, well, we could have built that in from the beginning, right? Putting in these requirements for certification. Some markets have, uh, 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 New York, Florida, Michigan, those are, and Maryland are all licensed marijuana markets. And in some cases, they cross with their hemp requirements as well that
Mhm.
require certification, right? But what about all the other states?
Right. Right. So you mentioned it earlier with like a Sched 3, you made the comment that, some operators are probably going to get a bill that they don't want, don't like, can't afford, what have you. So if that's it may be a tipping point, and interestingly, I read an article the other day where the author was talking about the potentiality of Sched 3, and they looked at the betting markets. I don't know if that's what they're called, but these markets where it's kind of like playing the stocks, but you're placing bets on things or
Yeah,
whatever. I don't
on
really understand
anything.
it. I haven't looked at it, but there's a betting market that's got like a Sched 3 line. And the most money I think is on 2027 or something, like middle of 2027. So they were saying maybe that's the most accurate read we can get today. But if and when that type of thing happens, that sort of change, and or let's say it was completely deregulated, and I guess it wouldn't be completely deregulated at that point, but let's say it was treated like alcohol, tobacco, more of that. We're more in that category of classification of scheduling, right?
Mhm.
Um, how does that change things, and what is the big bill? What do those changes look like for operators that they'd be faced with in that regard?
Well, great questions. So, like, I think you already alluded to it, right? It's a crystal ball. Nobody knows. I have no idea. But if Schedule 3 becomes the law of the land, and that's for whatever reason, the only way you can access the market now in the US is now through Schedule 3, which I just reject because there's no way these states are going to allow their legacy markets to just go away. They're going to grandfather they're in, right? They're not going to say no to billions in tax dollars. That's just not going to happen. But whatever. Let's say it is. And then poof, all of that goes away for some whatever crazy reason. And now you have to do Schedule 3. That means you got to be pharmaceutical. Do you really want to be pharmaceutical? I don't think the market really understands what that means and those requirements, nor is there and that will certainly weed out many, 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 many mom and pops, right? Because they're not going to apply for pharmaceutical licenses. That's just not feasible. So again, I don't see that as like what's going to happen, right? But if it
Mhm.
did, pharmaceutical requirements would come into place, which would mean people would be not only required to they would not be required to meet like food and dietary supplement requirements, right? Which is already a high bar because we don't have to require to any safety and quality requirements in our market, unfortunately. Complying with pharmaceutical requirements is way above and beyond even that.
Mhm.
And I would see that it being because you have both 21 CFR 210, and that's for the production of APIs, so cannabinoid extracts, and then purified cannabinoids themselves, right? That are standardized, very routinely reproducible, have full contaminant profiles defined, right? That's the manufacturer of those. And then you've got 21 CFR 211. When you take those APIs and you put them into a form factor that we all know and love, right? Tablets, capsules, sprays, whatever, patches, right? Now you're manufacturing a product with an active pharmaceutical ingredient in it that not only needs to meet all of these GMPs, et cetera, but you also got to have uh, uh, drug trials and actual substantiated claims, right? You can't just sell now anything out onto the market because you want. No, it's got to have a substantiated um, structure function claim that goes along with it, right? That's really where we've now gone to a far more extensive burden than I think the industry is really looking for. What I think we're going to see, which I will hope, which is a much more clearer reality, I think we're getting closer to even, is from the FDA's most recent position and easing on hemp-derived CBD cannabinoid products. So now, right, as of April 1st, which everyone probably thought was a great April Fool's joke, right? But with the FDA easing these requirements, they are allowing medical professionals to incorporate into their patient treatment plans CBD or hemp-derived CBD cannabinoid products that are produced according to dietary supplement standards. And that means that it's a guarantee if you were to go get a dietary supplement certification for your cannabinoid herbal materials or your cannabinoid substances or your cannabinoid products, that's going to open up a massive opportunity for you here in the United States right now.
Wow, I had no idea that change existed. Um, so they're easing that regulation, but at the same time looking at shutting down or changing that loophole that exists that allows
Yes,
for the conversion and the
or intoxicating
for
cannabinoids.
intoxicating, creating
Yes.
the, taking the hemp derived and using it for bevs and things like that. How do I'm just curious, and maybe you don't know, but I'm curious how the two things jibe. I mean, it would seem like going in two different directions simultaneously.
No, I think it actually is it's a smart plan because there's clearly a delineation, right, between products that are intoxicants and those that are not, right? CBD is clearly not an intoxicant, so there should be and has good data and research behind it that shows that its risk to public health and safety is very, 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 very low, very negligible, right? So it makes sense that the FDA would take a position that for cannabinoids that they can deem as natural, right? They got to come from a plant and not being THC class, as they've called them, or AKA being non-intoxicating,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
Because their definition of THC class, while not quite defined, basically is anything with the same cannabinoid effects as delta 9 THC, which we know means what? It gets you high,
Mhm. Mhm.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
Or similar effects to delta 9 THC, which what are yeah, they get you high. So, so we just really simplify that down to the FDA is going to create a list of all natural cannabinoids, which will tell us what are in play. They'll or the yes, because they're going to say all synthetics, right? Semi-synthetics, converted, all of those are not in play. Then from those naturals, they're going to weed that down and say, okay, these non-intoxicating ones can now go through this channel we just eased and opened for cannabinoid products to go into patient treatment plans
Okay.
when produced under dietary supplement standards, right? That's where you can kind of see that going. Whereas on the intoxicating side, where that's going to go into most likely our grandfathered markets, right? Still in the dispensary channel, still being marijuana and all of that stuff. But there's strong push from alcohol to carve out a beverage channel. So I think we may see three things at the end of the year, potentially, right? A list of non-intoxicating cannabinoids, which can then have access through this eased market opening, a low cannabinoid content intoxicating cannabinoid product or cannabinoid beverage carve outs that will be under hemp specifically, right, for low cannabinoid content beverages. And then everything else will still be accessible, but through the dispensary channels, right? but and not under the FDA's purview
Well,
or considerations.
yeah, I appreciate you sharing all that. I mean, that's a really interesting breakdown. I think that's super valuable. I think people listening are can get a lot of value out of that whole chain of thought and unraveling of what's going on because it is super complicated right now, right?
Yeah,
And even with I will say the beverage piece, I think beverages are probably long term a product that people want. It's a consumption method that people are trained for already.
yes,
You go to any party, we met first at it was a cocktail party down in Denver, right? And nobody was drinking hemp beverages because they don't allow them here in Colorado.
not available
But
to us.
if they had allowed it, or if they did allow it, I'm sure everybody would have been standing around drinking, most people, a lot of people would have been having a hemp beverage and other people would have been having their beer, whiskey, or whatever. But yeah, we're humans are trained to do this, right? We're trained to sit around and talk over a drink. So, I think that's super interesting. So, as you look at the landscape and the work you're doing with cannabis safety and quality, if you could offer any guidance, advice to people who are listening, to people who are operating, whether they're, doing vertically integrated, where they're all things to all people, as I like to say, or whether they're very focusing on a niche of just cultivation or just producing extractions and products and things like that. What advice do you have as we continue to evolve in this industry and continue to see these changes, not only to the regulatory, the laws, the rules and regs that we operate under, but then also just the markets, that feels like the market is sort of constantly in flux as to what the consumer wants, how we're able to produce it, price, obviously compression is a huge issue for many. So what advice do you have?
That's a great question, Mark. Hard one to answer. But I think what I would say is to try to figure out how to work in a less than $10,000 investment or as an annual spend as a way to offset, say, think of it as maybe around 10x or more in laboratory testing costs per year because you've now implemented a preventative measures strategy rather than a reactive strategy that's solely reliant on finished product testing. Is that going to eliminate your finished product testing? No. But is it going to reduce the amount you need to do? Absolutely. And that's a cost benefit that you can do right there, especially as the markets continue to compress. I would see that, again, trying to work that less than $10,000 annual spend into your budget as it for certification is a very low buy-in for a future-proofing strategy for your business. No matter how the federal cookie is going to, federal cookie crumbles in the future, right? It is inevitable that certification is going to be a way for the retailer to mitigate their risk of selling your product. And they do that now for, as we mentioned, right, for every other thing you see on the shelves. So it makes sense that that same risk mitigation strategy, especially for our types of products, are going to be applied for cannabinoid materials. So it's again, it's a four to maybe at most a five-figure investment, right? That's going to help you avoid potentially a six to seven-figure potential loss from either recalls, adverse events that might happen, a product complaint, or the loss of trust from your consumer in the marketplace.
Well, thank you. That's super valuable. And, I enjoyed our conversation. It's so great to get to know more about what you're doing and get your experience and your knowledge in this area of our industry. It's super valuable. I think, anybody listening is going to get a lot out of today's show. So thank you so much for joining me. On the screen, if people are watching, there is a QR code, it looks like, that they could scan, that they can go to the website, for the cannabis safety and quality. But if people want to get in touch with you directly, how would they go about that?
Easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. It should be very easy to search if you're looking for Darwin Millard. And I can certainly provide, Mark, for your listeners in the show notes, my LinkedIn contact information.
Awesome.
And my email is very easy. It's my name. You can either use darwin.millard at csqcertification.com, or my first initial, the letter D, Millard at csqcertification.com also works.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you so much. I really appreciated the opportunity to talk about CSQ and how it can be of value for operators.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, and live long and process.
All